Michael sat on the edge of the couch, his shoulders slumped and his head buried in his hands. The weight of the day, of life, pressed down on him like never before. Clara knelt in front of him, her face full of concern as she gently touched his hands, pulling them away from his face. "Michael, look at me," she said softly. His red-rimmed eyes met hers, filled with vulnerability and pain. Without a word, she leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close. He stiffened for a moment, then melted into her embrace, his head resting on her shoulder. "You're not alone," she whispered, stroking the back of his head. "I'm here. I've always been here for you." He put me in his arms and did not want to do anything else. He put his hand in my shirt, then he took my hand and put it in his shirt. He took off his shirt and put me on top of him. She kept moving her hands on my bare back. I gave her a passionate kiss on her stomach and she unzipped my pant before she could do anything else. I stopped her. Her hand wanted to go down a little more. His arms hesitantly came up to circle her, clutching her like a lifeline. The warmth of her body, the steady rhythm of her breathing, calmed the storm raging inside him. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice muffled against her. I don't know what to do anymore." "You don't have to apologize," Clara replied, her tone firm yet kind. "You're allowed to feel this way. You're allowed to need someone." She pulled back slightly, her hands moving to his face, cupping his cheeks. "Come here," she said gently, guiding him to lie down on the couch. Michael hesitated but allowed her to maneuver him until his head rested in her lap. She smoothed his hair back, her fingers running through the strands with a soothing rhythm. "This used to help when you were a kid," she said with a small, wistful smile. "Whenever you felt upset, you'd curl up on the couch, and I'd do this until you fell asleep." "I remember," he murmured, his voice softer now. "It was the only time I ever felt safe." Her hand paused for a moment before she continued stroking his hair. "You're safe now, too," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "With me, you're always safe." Michael turned his face into her lap, his breath hitching as tears welled up in his eyes. Clara's other hand rested on his shoulder, grounding him, anchoring him to the moment. "You're too good to me," he whispered. "No, I'm exactly what you need," she replied, her thumb brushing away a stray tear from his cheek. The silence between them was heavy but comforting, filled with unspoken words and emotions neither could articulate. Clara's fingers continued their gentle movements, lulling Michael into a rare moment of peace. "Clara," he murmured, his eyes half closed. "Thank you for everything." Her lips curved into a sad smile as she leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to his temple. "Always, Michael, always." Michael's breathing softened as Clara's gentle touch worked its magic, calming the chaos in his mind. Her fingers ran through his hair with a soothing rhythm, and he closed his eyes, letting himself drift into a rare moment of peace. She looked down at him, her heart aching with a mixture of tenderness and confusion. How had they come to this moment? She knew the line they were tiptoeing across, but right now, her need to comfort him was stronger than her fears of consequence. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked softly, her hand pausing briefly to rest on the side of his face. Michael shook his head, his cheek pressing against her thigh. "Not right now, I need this, you." Clara's heart skipped at his words, and she bit her lip to keep from responding too quickly. His vulnerability pulled at her in ways she didn't want to admit, ways she knew were dangerous. But she didn't move, didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned back against the couch, one hand resting on his shoulder while the other continued stroking his hair. "It's okay," she whispered. "We don't have to talk, just rest." Michael exhaled deeply, his body relaxing further as if her words had taken a weight off his chest. Minutes turned into what felt like hours, the two of them wrapped in a cocoon of silence and closeness. The world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the soft hum of the air conditioner and the warmth they shared in the dimly lit living room. Clara's mind wandered, torn between her growing feelings for him and the undeniable wrongness of it all. He wasn't just her nephew, he was vulnerable, searching for connection, and she was supposed to be the one to guide him, not this. Yet, when Michael shifted slightly and looked up at her with those tired, grateful eyes, she couldn't bring herself to step away. "You always make me feel better," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Her lips curved into a small smile, though her heart ached. "That's because I care about you, Michael, more than you know." He held her gaze for a moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then, without warning, he reached up and took her hand in his. lacing their fingers together. "You don't just care," he said, his voice firmer now. "You've been the only person who's ever truly understood me. Even when I don't say anything, you just know." Clara swallowed hard, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers. "Of course I do," she murmured. "I've known you your whole life. I've seen every part of you, Michael. I know how strong you are, even when you don't believe it yourself." Michael sat up slightly, his head still resting against her lap, but his gaze locked onto hers. "You see me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not the person I try to be for everyone else. Just me." She nodded, her hand moving to his cheek. "Always." The weight of their proximity grew heavier, the air around them charged with unspoken tension. Clara could feel her heart racing, her breath hitching as Michael's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "Michael," she started, but her voice faltered. "I'm not imagining this, am I?" he asked, his voice trembling. "This connection between us, it's real, isn't it?" Clara hesitated, torn between her instincts and the truth she couldn't deny. "It's real," she admitted finally, her voice barely audible. Michael sat up fully now, his hands moving to hers, holding them tightly as he searched her face for any sign of hesitation. "I don't care what anyone else would say," he said, his voice growing steadier. "You're the only person who makes me feel alive, Clara, and I think I've been falling for you for a long time." Clara closed her eyes, her emotions crashing over her like a tidal wave. "Michael, this is dangerous," she whispered. "We can't." "But we already have," he interrupted, his tone desperate. "We're here, right now, because we both feel it. Don't tell me I'm wrong." She opened her eyes, meeting his intense gaze. The vulnerability, the need, the love in his expression, it was overwhelming. She couldn't bring herself to deny him, even though she knew she should. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't want to hurt you or us. You could never hurt me," Michael said firmly, cupping her face with his hands. "You've done nothing but heal me. Clara, you've shown me what it means to be cared for, to be seen. How could that ever be wrong?" She leaned into his touch, her tears slipping down her cheeks. "Michael, this isn't just about us. It's about the world, about your uncle." His expression darkened slightly, but his hands remained steady. "Uncle David hasn't been here for you in years, Clara," he said quietly. "I've seen the way he treats you, like you're just a part of the furniture in his life. You deserve better. You deserve to feel loved, to be adored." Clara shook her head, though her resolve was crumbling with every word he spoke. "This will change everything," she whispered. "Maybe everything needs to change," Michael replied. "But I can't go back to pretending I don't feel this. Can you?" Her silence was all the answer he needed. Slowly, tentatively, he leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a soft, hesitant kiss. Clara froze, her mind screaming at her to stop, but her heart refused to listen. She kissed him back, her hands gripping his shirt as years of loneliness and longing poured out in that single, forbidden act. When they pulled apart, both were breathless, their faces inches from each other. Clara's tears fell freely now, but Michael caught them with his thumb, wiping them away as he held her gaze. "I love you," he said simply. Clara's lip quivered as she nodded, the words she'd been fighting finally spilling out. "I love you too." The admission was both a release and a burden, freeing them to embrace their feelings but binding them to a secret that could never be shared. Clara pulled him into another hug, his head resting against her chest as she stroked his hair. "Whatever happens," she murmured, her voice trembling, "we face it together." Michael held her tightly, his arms wrapped around her as if letting go would shatter the fragile connection they'd built. "I won't let you go," he promised. For the rest of the night, they stayed like that, trapped in each other's arms, silently committing to a love they couldn't deny, no matter the cost. The world outside could wait. In that moment, all that mattered was them.